I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes.
Sam Grant will be known to many of you as the one who's responsible for producing some of the, sort of most intense, bone-crunching yet, for me, sort of life-affirming riffs for pigs. He's also an artist and a producer who's built his own studio. So talking, about these kind of side hustles and projects is a big thing on this podcast. So, to hear that Sam is about to unleash his own side project, Rubber O, onto us is really pretty exciting. The album is called Strange Craft, and it's like this sort of kaleidoscope of, sort of retro, futuristic, psych-cosmic, analog and digital. It's this real sort of mind bend, and it gives me this sort of feeling of familiarity yet unfamiliarity. And I was trying to work out what this made me feel. And I think it's perhaps because it's the way that I feel about the world right now. So Sam, thanks so much for coming on. I'm really excited to have a chat to you about all of this. Sounds really exciting.
It's a pleasure. Total pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No, not at all. It was funny because when I heard the album, I was trying to think, rightly or wrongly about. You think, are there sort of comparisons, and I couldn't think of a comparison, but what I could compare was to the album that made me sort of feel, not necessarily musically, but feel like, and it was Frank Black's Teenager of the Year from back in the kind of mid-90s. So I think like his second solo album. And that one really made me feel like I was, kind of like Alice going through the looking glass into this sort of oral and kind of visual world where you kind of throw out your sort of preconceptions. It was just so sort of that sort of familiarity, yet very unfamiliar as well.
Right.
And I think it's a phenomenal piece of work. I'm really, really excited to see what happens when it comes out.
Yeah, so am I, to be honest. It is an odd one because it's not really. I never wrote it with a like a referential aesthetic in mind. There wasn't a sense of. There was so what I do with production a lot, if I'm working with artists or I'm working on my own stuff, is I like to create rules before I start going.
Yeah.
That define boundaries and make it sit in its own space where it has to operate. And with this one, I think that the guiding elements or the aspects that make it what it is aesthetically to give you that vibe. Like there was a few rules that I threw in. One, I didn't want to have symbols in the album.
Yeah.
But then I mean, the rules are there to be broken, but you have to justify to yourself why you're breaking them. And then hard pan bass, left and right. I wanted to. I mean, we talked about it later. The idea of I saw the album visually more than I saw it sonically. I saw a shape in the production of how it was weighted in my mind. What's front, what's back, what's left, what's right, and creating this shape of sound. And then there's other things. No guitar chords. I was very clear in my head that the guitar was only allowed to play melody, and even then, often only allowed to reinforce a vocal. Or there were some really odd rules that I knew would give such a scope of creativity, and fundamentally, a lot of those rules were kind of meant as an antithesis to what Pigs is.
Yeah.
I knew what I wanted to do is not fall back on any trope that I had developed on that side of writing. And then I also knew that I have a very big melody itch that I need to scratch quite often.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's what gives Pigs quite an odd sense sometimes, is because sometimes it goes down some unexpected melody angles. This was an opportunity to go full throttle into just friction of melody at times. Quite playful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's it. And you know, you kind of like have the sort of the synths, you know, plus you know, the sort of distortion going on as well, which you know is a really sort of nice balance. And kind of like I think that for me, when I listen to it, it sort of like helps with that, um, you know, sort of unfamiliar, you know, kind
Mm,
of thing. It's like sort of playful on one hand, but sort of quite raw, you know, in you know in other ways.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There was everything about that record was a trying to pare it down to
Mm,
like as minimal an essence as possible.
yeah,
Um, like a lot of, I guess, a lot of it reflects working as a producer and working with artists. Sometimes you have to bite your lip, or you have to appreciate that there's a working process in place that artist uses, where
yeah,
things like putting lots of elements in, people like to make things really busy, and my instinct to me is often that I can make things sound bigger when there's fewer elements. You know, it's a
mm,
counterintuitive kind of process. And there's little moments where I'll do things on records where I'm like, God, man, that sounds amazing, but there's no way I can steamroller their their thing with
yeah,
this concept. But then it gets stored in a little part of my brain, and I'm like, okay, I absolutely love um, two basses playing um,
mm,
the same thing, playing in parallel,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that sound is magic. But it's completely inappropriate for me to have a band come in and be like, right, what we're going to do actually is we're going to give you two basses for this album, and it's just not possible. But for years I've had that in my head of like, well, I have to explore this further, like, because
yeah,
it's such an interesting. It's against the rules as well, because I do a lot of
mm,
mastering for vinyl, and you know, as big no is panned bass. Some
yeah,
people just like, oh, you can't pan a bass. Like, it's like, of course you can. I mean, they were doing it in the '60s all the time.
yeah,
So, like, loads of jazz records have got a bass hard panned right, or
yeah.
whatever. We did it on Peasant, actually, on Richard Dawson's album. I stuck the bass hard panned right and then stuck the drum kit hard panned left. And it was a bit of a revelation moment of like, bloody hell, that sounds really good. Like these
It's
little,
phenomenal.
yeah, little moments of like, okay, this is a really magic little nugget that just sat in my brain for, like, say, years of like, well, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah. There's a few things that you said there that really sort of interest me. And I guess like the first one is, you know, because we're, you know, this sort of, you know, we're talking about, you know, kind of mindsets, I'm interested in that different approach that perhaps you have to take when, you know, you've got your sort of producer and, you know, kind of like engineer
Mm.
head on, versus, you know, kind of like you're sort of creating the music, and how you know, you perhaps temper your approach, you know, to, you know, with artists that you work with when you're doing the production compared to when you're sort of doing the writing. You know, it shows a lot of, you know, kind of self-awareness and, you know, kind of empathy for how they perhaps work as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's also a massive sliding scale.
Mm,
Um, I think I find myself in a funny space as a producer because I work with a very broad spectrum of sound.
yeah.
I've just produced a record with a band, Witch Fever, who were
Mm,
very heavy, and
yeah.
then and that was at the same time I was finishing on the co-production with Richard Dawson's next album, which is like really spatial, you know, folk tinged,
Yeah.
esoteric kinds of like, and you have to judge. I've learned that I need to go into each one with this sense of the sliding scale of like, how far is my approach. Like another thing, the age of the artist. Like if they're young,
Mm,
I always used to find it uncomfortable when I'd see in inverted commas, you know, the producer come in and take a young artist and just basically rip apart their process,
their process.
and then
Yeah.
make his record. Or I mean, I could say hers, but predominantly, you know, it would
Mm,
be a male producer.
yeah.
um and it's yeah, it's something that I was always wary of, about that involvement in the creative process, and in the trust that's required as well, because you
Yeah.
can very quickly like sour the process if you start um almost bullying the creativity.
I think, yeah, so it's a really good point. That I mean, I like from my own, life, and things that I've done, where you create something. It could be anything that you sort of create that's sort of personal to you, and you can't help but be, I guess, protective of it.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, kind of guarded, and and dependent on your personality, you can react badly to, even comments on it which you perceive as criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So you take what you're saying there. You have to be very kind of careful, and sort of really understand the people that you are working with and what
Yeah.
they react well and badly to, I guess.
Yeah, and then there's the added complication as well of who's involved in the process. So you're producing the album, and like Richard, he's got complete free reign. The label are really happy with him working to how he wants to work, or maybe you're working with an artist and a label where there's a very holistic process, and everyone is involved in that creative process, and you have to balance expectations as well. And then sometimes you're the moderator of that process, and trying to be the in the middle ground. So yeah, it can be really difficult at times.
That moderator role must be when that sort of comes up. You're trying to try and bring different opinions together and stuff. That's kind of quite a challenge.
It's part psychologist at times, but
yes, exactly.
It's fun though. It is really fun because it all harks back to creativity. And to be quite frank, I would value the artist's voice over pretty much anything. And I would, as a creative, I'm always in the corner of the artist, which is why I don't want to be suddenly telling them, "Oh, you should do this at this part." I mean, I can if they want suggestions, or if we're going through a creative flow on a section, I can help guide. But it is funny, so I do have to catch myself, and then, like I say, all these thoughts and ideas, you pop them somewhere in your head, and they might crop up later for someone else, or they might be something where it's time for me to exploit them as much as I can.
So that kind of kind of itch that you were talking about, that sort of itch for melody that and that you kind of stored away, and obviously now you feel that it's been the right time for you to to do this kind of project. Was that just a kind of like instinctive thing? Do you think, okay, this feels right now, I'm kind of ready to do this?
Yeah, it was very instinctive actually. It was a natural process. I was about to start looking at doing another piano, like a mechanical piano.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about what I would do as an outlet on a alternative to what Pigs is, because Pigs is such a an all-encompassing feature of life when it's in a campaign or whatever. It's very difficult to find time out of that, where you don't want to just sit and listen to a podcast or read a book, but it was just at the right time, and I wrote nothing, just playing around with this 2 bass idea, because I was like, oh, go on, I'll have a play with that now. And I was like, and then, you know what, I was like, there's definitely something in this. And then over the course of, I think, like 4 weeks, I would each night, my partner would go to bed at about 9:30, 10. I'd just go in the back, and we've got a little workshop, and I'd just write all the tracks.
Yeah.
Just each evening, I was on a roll at one point. I was doing maybe a song every 2 nights, which was like, God, this is fun now. It was like a real, like the scratching the itch is the perfect analogy, because it was just like stuff that was in there was just like, well, it was just falling out. Because the lyrics were a different kettle of fish. They took a couple of months of torture and anguish, because I'm not a lyricist, and I don't claim to be a lyricist. So that's a very different.
So what was that? What was the lyrics? Was that stuff that you were seeing around you, and your kind of vision of the world, or?
I think partly, yeah. It's kind of, some of the lyrics are a reflection of my own anxieties, I guess. But my own ridiculously, my own anxieties tend to exist in like nihilistic ideas of like, what's the point, and
Yeah.
where are we heading, and bigger picture stuff. I was very keen to avoid any sort of social commentary. I don't think I'm a big advocate of art which is intended to transport the individual and take them on a journey, as opposed to art that's going to thrust existence even harder into someone's psyche. Like, and I wanted everything to be, so there's stuff which is analogous, like analogies of our time and whatnot, but I was keen to at the same time be very playful and be very whimsical with it, and do some stuff tongue in cheek with the lyrics.
The art as well that sort of goes with the is which I think is Santi, isn't it? Which is it's incredible. I mean, and actually, it's incredible art on its own.
Yeah,
but it just really fits. I think it just really fits with the music, and I'm really interested in how all those, that oral and visual kind of meshes together.
Well, speaking of on the visual side of it, so like I was saying before, I kind of knew what the sound was visually before I knew what it was sonically, and I'm a very visual person in that regard. I kind of see things before I hear them, see shapes. So I knew on the production side, I knew how it would look on a sound stage before I could hear it.
Yeah,
and I knew sonically that I wanted sounds that felt elastic, and I wanted a sonic that was bendable. And in my head, I had a pianist coming in. There's a piano solo on Nothing, which was one of the things where I was like, I'm not even going to try and write something there. I'm just going to leave a space. And I had a good friend, brilliant pianist, come in, and I was trying to explain to him over text. He was like, "Have you got any reference tracks?" And it's like, "Well, no, I don't have any reference tracks." I was like, "But I can tell you that what it needs to sound like is," and I was trying to explain this idea of a rubber cube. And then if you turn the rubber cube like 45 degrees at either end, like twist it, and then try and imagine that feel of resistance, like a very smooth pull in two directions. And when you let go, it'll flick back in. And it's such a, like, I can feel that description and sense. It's real in my head. That feeling. And I knew the music was that it had to spring and bounce, and basically it's rubber in my head.
Like, just got that kind of tactile kind of feeling.
And so everything was tactile. Like, I wanted everything to be biteable. And when I play the music, I feel it in my throat, which is a weird thing to say, because I really want to bite the sound. I wanted to create something that was tangible.
That's phenomenal. Yeah.
And then when it came to the artwork, it was kind of a no-brainer from my perspective. I was like, I really want hyper-real objects. Like, I want something that is it's real but unreal. It's like touchable but imaginary, and skirting this space between the here and the other world.
I think that's a really interesting area. I mean, going back to sort of when you were a kid, when you were younger, what sort of interested you, and kind of like what did you sort of things did you gravitate towards when you were younger?
I was very much like, I wanted to do everything all the time. I was really into sports, did loads of sports. I used to love playing anything that was I could ping around. Probably full of energy. Probably a nightmare for my parents. But then I used to love. I was always building things, and I remember building a computer. I used to like. I love the way knowing how things work. And I suppose that's quite a permanent thing. Like, and that lends towards, or leads you down the garden path, I guess, of as a musician of being an engineer or producer, because you're constantly obsessed with like how something is constructed, and whether that's in the literal sense of like, well, how does this compressor work, or in the sense of like songwriting, it's like how are these sounds coming together to make that feeling kind of thing.
So kind of like real sort of curiosity for things, about how things work.
Yeah, totally,
like
totally.
Yeah.
Like having Encarta on the computer and just, reading pages of Encarta,
Just reading,
just being like, oh wow, this is cool.
That's phenomenal.
Bit of an obsessive for that.
I mean, that's kind of I mean, I think generally as a kind of thing to have, as we kind of go through life, I think curiosity is is kind of so important. And sometimes I think I wonder that like nowadays, with the internet, I mean, there's so much information to hand that you can kind of get your hands on, and I wonder sometimes in one way that you can become a little bit sort of blasé and don't think for yourself, because
definitely.
it's just at hand. But on the other hand, there's this just like availability. There's certainly like when I was a kid, I had to go to libraries, and stuff like that, and to kind of find things out. But now it's, I don't know, it's a weird sort of phenomenon.
And that's partly why I do things like create rules in production.
Right. Yeah.
It's two birds with one stone there. It's a guiding creative principle, but it also removes the problem that I think we face in music as producers and engineers these days, which is that there is, well, mixing more so actually than engineering, but there's an insanely deep pool of resources and opportunities and potential, and with either it's sampled instruments or plugins or effects, or like if you open up, I use Logic predominantly as a software, but if you open it up and you go, right, I'm going to write a song, it's like you could go in a million different directions, and it's all what's the word, it's stacked insofar as every decision can create two more decisions, and and so it's like it can quickly spiral into absolute chaos, and it's the quickest way I think to end up with homogenized crap in that regard, because there is we are just fed and given so much space and so much security because of that, a sense of of being able to just fall back on anything, because with digital, that it's infinite in that regard.
When with you sort of creating those rules or going in with a sort of firm idea, would you say that you kind of like really know your own mind, kind of like the direction that you go? I guess it sort of says that you understand what you want when you're kind of going into something.
Yeah, there is that, and that probably is one of the things that's taken the longest in my practice to nail down, is being able to start a process with the clear vision of what the end might look like. But it really helps working with artists. It really helps if there's like a good reference material, whether it's a film or a book or a playlist or their thoughts, and then off the back of that, you can start to be like, okay, well, it needs to be like this and it needs to be like that. And what would be really interesting is if we say that let's, for example, one of the ones recently was like, well, let's only use real reverberance. So let's use just the spring tank, the plate reverb, and the room, and then every time I want to create depth in the mix, I have to think about where the mic's going to be, or which vibe of reverb is it going to be, and then all of a sudden I've probably got thousands of emulated reverbs on the computer, but I don't think they'll add much held in contrast to the idea of like, okay, well, I've only got 3 reverbs.
Yeah.
How can I shape each one of these and make them work in harmony and start to build a palette off just this little space? And then consequently, the record comes out the other side and it's got such an aesthetic, a dominating aesthetic, that it kind of lives in a space. Then it's itself, and that's a really critical, I think, element to a good record.
It's really interesting, the different approaches that people take. I remember speaking to somebody else, and she was it was I don't know if you've heard the band Sink Your Teeth. It's like a sort of duo, and Gemma, who is the sort of bass player, the Gemma and Maria both done some solo stuff, and Gemma said that she doesn't like to know rules. because in her personality is that she doesn't like breaking rules. So, she likes kind of like in her life, generally, she likes to stay on the, kind of straight and narrow and stuff. So she doesn't know the rules because then there are no rules to break.
I get you. Yeah. That's
Kind
good
of
to brave that. That's, I mean, I'm a total, I'm maybe a bit of a control freak or obsessive compulsive. Like I'm really dialed in on how I like my organization and stuff. And you can probably hear it in the music to some extent because it's so like snappy and it moves in certain places and everything is in a spot. I would be pretty terrified, to be honest, to try and write something and just go down the garden path with it. I would be heavily critical of it afterwards, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if there are things that like don't go to plan, how do you feel about those, and how do you sort of react? In those sort of situations, because when you've got lots of people around, I mean, the world generally is kind of quite uncertain, and there's a lot of volatility in it.
I think patience, because the flip side of that is that I'm very patient.
Okay.
And it's a case of it's in the right time and place. Sometimes I'm like with my own stuff, I'm incredibly impatient. So I'm like, right, it's done. Let's go, move on. Let's do another one, because I really enjoy that process. I enjoy the creative process. I don't enjoy the let's snip up this part and nudge it in.
All the bits around it.
And if I'm working with someone else, it's like, no, we need to do the fine tuning here. But for me, I'm just like, no, it's good. Let's go. But what was it? Where were we again? About
we were talking about oh my god, I've forgotten now.
Basically, I'm a control freak.
You're about control. Yeah, it's about when things don't go to plan.
And,
how you react.
So it's I think it's just a case of either I've got a good idea that where things are at, we can nudge things, or I say nudge things not in a literal sense, but just like repoint the boat and be like, okay, we can get back on track if we go down here. Or it's like, well, actually, I do think what we need to do is do a step or 2 steps back. Let's go back to here, because everything was singing here, and what we know is that was a dead alley, and just go down this route. There was one track on the Rubber O album, Arcade, was a track, and I was convinced in the demo that there was something there. And then when it came to sticking drums and elements on that I wanted to do, it wasn't sitting, and that was the only track there where it was like, actually, this isn't working. And then it was just, but I really liked the vibe of the bass with the drums. So then I took everything off the bass and the drums and changed the key, which modulated the bass, which made a totally different track. And then it was like, oh, amazing! And so that was that. I guess that's kind of Garden Path style. That's kind of but like pulling it back a bit. But I had the rules to play off. I knew, okay, so let's reimagine the key. Let's play the guitar part. Let's stick a synth on here and see how that's going. And then the lyrics came, and I was like, it ended up being one of my favorite tracks on the record, actually.
Yeah, I think that the record is sort of populated with those sort of things. I mean, I know you released the first one you released was Little Demon, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which I think that's a massive favorite of mine. I think it's a great song, and I kind of like that sort of. I think, like I mentioned earlier, that sort of combo of you got the synth, which sounds very kind of analog, and then you've got this like kind of like really fuzzy bass going as well. I just love that sort of combination. It's great. It's a great thing.
Yeah, hairy, trying to make it all hairy.
Yeah,
I'm really obsessed with distortions.
Yeah,
if there was one thing, because I don't think I have any sort of like particular aesthetic as a producer. I had one act come in, an artist or group, and they were saying that they wanted to work with me because they felt like I was really good at working with a busy mix, which made me laugh because I really enjoy working with minimal mixes. And it was like, okay, but I tend to do it, and I do end up working a lot with busy mixes and then trying to make everything fit.
I mean, thinking about the stuff that you've done over the years, like you were saying earlier, kind of Pigs is like 10 years old now, and then you've had I'm just thinking about how you've had the sculpture, and the kind of like art installations. You could built your studio. Now you've got the kind of solo project, or let's say the solo project, but the Rubber O project, and those different things, those kind of like side projects that you've been doing, or side hustles. I mean, what looking at those over the years, what do you feel that you've really personally have sort of got from those?
It's as daft as it sounds. There's very little more than just making something. Like I'm really obsessed with the journey.
Yeah,
I love the creative process.
mm.
And then I have a little window of a couple of days afterwards where I'm sat looking at something. I'm like, oh, I really enjoyed that. That was really good. And then I kind of just like, all right, okay.
That's kind of done.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I should do something else. I want to do something else now. And whether it's like, and it varies loads. Like I get little obsessions with soldering, where I'll build a couple of bits of equipment. But they when you're building a piece of gear, it takes a couple of days. It's like a quick burn. And then I'm like, that's over. And then I need to create something else. And I'm just like, so I totally love the feeling of making.
Mm.
And I really love the physicality of making as well, when I can have that.
Mm.
So like Sonic art stuff is often sits in that realm, which is really nice. Unfortunately, I get very pushed with time these days, especially my partner. I've got the 2-year-old, so I have to pick my battles way more these days. And the doing I guess more recognized musical output is far more in my wheelhouse in the bigger picture. So it's makes more sense pragmatically than because the Sonic art is the one thing with the art. I love doing Sonic art, and I love working within the arts and collaborating with artists to bring sound to visual stuff. But I don't know my way around the art world in the way that I know my way around the music world. And so it's at some point I have to realize that there's a career in existence, and I need to nurture it to some extent, as opposed to just making things for the sake of making things.
I mean, kind of like music career, production career. I mean, there's, I'm a big fan of sort of like diversifying and kind of doing things and sort of understanding your, I guess, kind of strengths. You kind of like merging what you're good at versus what you enjoy. Obviously we all need to have an eye on what gives us a living as well. So it's kind of quite a balance, isn't it, of managing those things.
Totally is a balance. And sometimes like the psychology trumps the wallet. Sometimes you need to do something which is just for your own mental perseverance, as opposed to because it's going to bring some money in. And I think that's really important. And I often think people generally, a lot of people aren't doing enough of that, the gratuitous creating, just making mistake. I think it's a really magical, whether it's musical instruments or another one where I think like I've seen so many artists over the years, because we started the studio as a business when we were 18, me, Chris, John, and a lad Doug, and there were so many friends that were musicians that we'd work with or record their projects, and then slowly you see people just put their instrument down, and you're like, don't do that. Like, then you ask, well, are you still playing the drums, or are you still playing the guitar? Oh, I've not got them out in years, kind of thing. And you're like, no, like that's completely the wrong. Like you've got the wrong picture there. Like you've.
Do you know when I was a kid? So I was when I was maybe 8 or 9. I started playing the cello. My dad was sort of classically trained, and he was a singer and stuff. And, I think he kind of wanted me to take up an instrument. So I took one of the most cumbersome things around, apart from a double
Yeah.
bass or drums, but we'll come to the drums later.
Yeah.
But and as a sort of kid, I kind of grew up with sort of punk music, and so I had this dilemma in my head as I got into my teens of kind of punk rock music and classical music.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, what am I going to do? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I gave up the cello, right? But a couple of years ago, I went into a music store in Soho and in London, and I'd kind of like had this little sort of itch. I thought, I wonder if I could still play. I hadn't picked it up for like 30 years or something.
Yeah.
And it obviously it was very rusty, but the bones of it were kind of still there.
Yeah.
So, then you start to think, oh God, but it obviously just wasn't the right time for me then.
Yeah, it's a funny thing though. I think there's people have this sense, and I'm guilty of it as well. Sometimes of like, if I'm going to be creating, it needs to have some sort of like purposeful output, or it needs to be of a particular quality, or or you can't be like 40 and in a band if you're not like doing something with it. And it's like, no, of course you can. Like it's this, maybe it's like I don't know if it's a Western idea or like neoliberal kind of quantifying of everything, where we realize that, or we think that things have to have like a quantified output.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that puts so many people in a place where they just don't bother. Like, I can't draw, and it's like, you don't have to draw. Like, you don't have to be able like to draw or paint. It's not the like you don't need to come out of the other side of it with anything other than the process, and that's kind of lost, I think, which is a shame.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm also involved with this like an arts lab with a group of people, including youth from Killing Joke, who's an artist. He's an artist as well, and he I mean, I didn't really think of myself as a kind of artist. I started doing some charcoals, but one of the things that he said was the first thing you need to do is call yourself an artist, because it gets in your mind that that's what you are. Rather than thinking, oh, I can't draw and I shouldn't touch that. Just go and do it. Just actually sort of do it. And you're right. I think you're totally right about this kind of idea and notion that we have that of measuring productivity by certain kind of quantifiable measures. And it doesn't need to be like that, but we get kind of conditioned that that's to be useful. If we're going to be useful, then you have to be able to kind of measure what you produce. It's kind of crazy, really.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with art, really. It's not like you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Art isn't about that. Art is a language. It's an expression. And sometimes it's just like spending some time with yourself, talking to yourself about something. And that's all it needs to be quite often. I've got loads of songs that I've written that have never seen the light of day, and I've just enjoyed writing them.
Just writing them.
And then that was the end of that song, and I've got folders of them, like, where just nice little things.
Yeah. With Rubber O, how are you sort of viewing that? Are you kind of like living that day by day, or do you kind of like have a sort of vision for it?
With Rubber O, I'm really enjoying the idea of having like a creative free rein on a process, because it's young. It can do and be whatever it wants to be.
Yeah.
It's funny with Pigs is a great example. Like, Pigs has kind of learnt where it is now musically, and it can do certain things, and it can play around with them. And I'm just mixing the next record at the moment, and it this does sound very different, I think, in its vibe to the others, but it still sits within a within a certain space. But it's really exciting when you're on a new project, because you don't have to write in a particular fashion, because that's what that is. I mean, and I talk about that like in a broad sense, like relative to the idea of like, on one hand Sonic Art, on another hand heavy rock band. Like, but I'm keen to start writing another album for Rubber O, and playing around more with aesthetic, and kind of that's just the embryo of where it can go.
Yeah.
I like it exists now, so I'm at peace with that idea.
Yeah.
Like I remember talking to Richard. He was always saying, Richard Dawson, who's when we talk about putting music out there, and he was like, "Oh, I had this realization." At one point, he was like, when you put music out there, he was like, it's out there, it exists now. Like that's it. There's no like in 5 years' time saying, "Oh, I kind of like I wish I didn't do that, or I want to change that." He's like, you have to be at peace with the release of it. And so there was like with Rubber O, I decided to switch off any of my analytical brain. I was like, okay, I'm going to let this be an out there thing. So it is now. So that's fine. I've kind of come to terms with that, and I'll let it grow for that reason.
I guess in 1, 2, 3 years time, when you kind of look back at it, it's a document of where you were at that time.
Yeah, it's exactly that, and I think that's a really important way of looking at it. Of creative obsessions. Like I already know aesthetically where I would like to take it, because I know where I am in that space. I really want to play around with a string quartet.
Okay.
But in quite a silly way.
Yeah.
So, so I can already start to envisage the aesthetic of it, the sonic of it, which is exciting.
That's really exciting, isn't it? And also, I guess with that, I mean, you're not restricting yourself to, I think it's happening more and more. You're not restricting yourself to any sort of genres, which I think are kind of a bit lazy, because we like to pigeonhole things, don't we? And sort of put them into our little boxes. It's just ease of recognition or whatever. And but you're really kind of like going across or kind of breaking those down and saying this is what's kind of influencing me.
Because but the shapes of sound, and I know what shapes of sound I want. I'm not too concerned about where that then fits on the palette of marketing. Like I don't know. It's probably a bit of a bugger for the label, because it then sits in a weird space and I've worked with other artists that are in that space. There's a band called Vocal Gentle. Their last album, like producing that, I was in awe of the guys. I thought it was a superb album, amazing album. But it was completely on the Venn diagram between like 3 or 4 different spaces, sat right plumb in the middle. And I was like chatting with them and kind of chuckling about the fact that like, well, no one's going to know where to put it. Like Enemy are going to be like, well, it's not Enemy. It's not, it's not.
We can't put it in the rock section.
Yeah, but the why is like, well, it's not experimental. It's pop. And then every publication is going to be like, well, it's not really in our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's just in art in and of itself, and it's a beautiful record, and it's a funny thing. Like it's an exceptional record, and they've been hoisted by their own petard for that regard.
I'd like that. I mean, I think for artists to do that, and also for producers to to take that on and sort of understand that what they're trying to achieve. I mean, I just think from a mindset point of view, it shows incredible open-mindedness and willingness to to open your mind to two different things, not to be restricted, which I think is hugely important.
It is important on the creative side of things, but it is a bit of a stitch.
It's a tough one from a marketing point of view.
For a label. I mean, to be fair though, I think that there's a couple of tracks on the Rubber album which are pretty earwormy. So
yeah, absolutely.
There's singles in it. So that's all right. Stuff to work with.
Brilliant, Sam. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time. It's been incredible. Really, really great talking to you, man. Yeah,
it's been really good, man. Really good. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cool. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks again. Okay. All the best.
Take care, man. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show, and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.